Promise.
Good morning and welcome to our lesson 7 of God of Restoration, Poetry and Prophecy in Isaiah 40 through 55. And today we are on to the fate of Babylon in Isaiah 46 and 47. Yeah, I saw some eek faces because it is an eek message in today's lesson. And yet I think there are also some real points of really some neat material in here as well. So I think it's going to be good. We'll be in all of 46 and 47. We're actually going to try to read it all. So hopefully we will have time. But before we do that, let's think about last lesson. So we had work day, so it's been 2 weeks. So we had to dredge up our memories here. What stood out to you in our lesson from the end of 45, 44 and all of 45? Who remembers what we talked about?
To me, a lot of it is a repetition of God saying, I am the only God, I am the creator. And he's constantly reminding them.
Constantly reminding of that God is the creator God, right?
The one and only.
Yeah, the one and only. What else?
And their idols are useless.
The worthlessness of idols. And there's a comparison that is not just implied, right? That is part of the message. Yeah, what else?
This isn't theological, but it's teaching me to look for the repetitions, like the courtroom and the I wills, and things that just keep appearing in the poetry.
Okay, so Mary said this isn't theological, but studying this is teaching me to look for these kind of literary things like the courtroom scenes, the repetition of words. So in a way, those are not theological, but they are the great big arrow that points to here's a theological point that wants to be emphasized here. And so it's a great skill to have, to find those repetitions, to find those thematic elements, because those are being used to point us to what's important theologically. So yeah, great point. Absolutely. Yeah.
That God wanted us to be a witness, but first we have to be believers.
Okay, so we witness first to ourselves, but then this purpose. So that purpose of blessing Israel is to then in turn bless other nations. And so this is the nature of election in Scripture. The nature of choosing one is to choose one to bless, that they would thereby bless the others. And that's how we're chosen as Christians as well, right? We are selected. We are chosen by God to be believers, not to the exclusion of others, but to the blessing of others. That is the purpose of Israel's election and of ours. Yeah, great point. What else? We had a name. Last week was Cyrus, right? It got specific. We drilled all the way down to there'll be someone, the week before it was someone's going to conquer Babylon. But now this week and his name is Cyrus, right? So we have all the way down to this expected person, Cyrus, but he's going to be God's anointed shepherd, and he's a foreigner. Right? This is not good news if you can't accept this idea that what you wanted someone who's the line of David, right? You wanted someone who's an Israelite, a descendant of the kings, and yet we have this foreigner. And God says, this is my choice. I'm the creator, and I am recreating, and I'm doing it through Cyrus. So there's some resistance to that message. We get some more resistance in this week's passage as well.
But again, he has to remind them, he is the creator.
He is the creator. And that reminder forms kind of the last passage of our section that we looked at last time, which was God's bigger plan, right? From creation all the way through, we saw all these hints that were headed towards Jesus, right? That God will be bringing salvation to the ends of the earth. Who did that? Jesus sent his followers. Tell everyone to the ends of the earth about me, right, in Acts. And this idea that at the end of time, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And that was something God said about God, the Father, God the speaker, in these passages. And then it's said about Jesus in Philippians. And so we saw those connections running all the way through. Yeah. Anything else stuck out to you from last week or that you want to comment on? Okay, well, great recap. So we'll move on to this week's lesson. We're going to, so we're looking at what's going to befall Babylon. And there is an initial scene that is the introduction to the next two chapters, so all of 46 and 47. So we're going to start by reading just that initial scene, verses, chapter 46, verses 1 through 4. Would someone please read that?
Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. The images that are carried about are burdensome, a burden for the weary. They stoop and bow down together, unable to rescue the burden. They themselves go off into captivity. Listen to me, you descendants of Jacob, all the remnant of the people of Israel, you whom I have upheld since your birth and have carried you since you were born. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. I will sustain you and I will rescue you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's our initial scene, and we're talking verse 1 about Bel and Nebo. Who are Bel and Nebo?
When I looked it up and looked for some information, it said they were representatives of the Babylon pride.
Okay, so that would be kind of a description of how they would function as representatives of Babylon's pride. They are idols. Yeah. Anyone remember anything about either of these idols? These are, so Bel is equivalent to Baal in some other Near Eastern cultures. The name means Lord, and also Bel means Lord and Baal means Lord. Trying to say those two words differently. They are different words, but they sound very similar. And in fact, like we met a King Belshazzar when we did the story of the writing on the wall in Daniel. Okay, that name means Bel protect the king. So it is a name with a nod to their Babylonian god. Nebo is supposed to be the son of Marduk, who is the leader of the Babylonian. Marduk is the leader of the Babylonian gods, and Bel is the son of Marduk, and believed to be the patron god of the royal dynasty. So Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebu means Nebo. It's Nebo be praised, or Nabu is praised, depending on, I'm sorry, Nebo, I got it mixed up with the next one. Nebo protect the boundary. I know that matters a lot. People are like, if you don't get the meaning of Nebuchadnezzar right, how can we understand any of this? So yeah, Nebo protect the boundary, like keep us from having encroachment, into our land. And then we talked about a king named Nabonidus, who is, he's not in the Bible. If you're making that face, you're like, I don't remember that from the Bible. It's not in the Bible. Okay. But we talked about him. He was the last king of the Babylonian dynasty. And he was a kind of an absent king, and the people were very unhappy with him being absent all the time, because one thing he was supposed to do is show up for these processions where they would carry their god statues, their idols, around in procession. And that those processions were not, so these festivals couldn't happen without the rightful king there. And he had disappeared to the, the summer home kind of place, and wasn't doing those duties. And the people were very disgruntled with not having these festivals in which they would carry their gods in procession. So this is all connected. And when Cyrus came in, he met very little resistance. And if you were to read the Babylonian account, people were like, yay, we love you, come be our king. Probably not, right? That's probably the Babylonian propaganda machine at work. But he met very little resistance when he captured the city, because God had sent him to do it and it was God's will, but also because the people were so unhappy with this final king, right? So it all kind of comes together here, right? So what is happening to Bel and Nebo in this little piece, just 1 and 2? They're getting carried around. Yeah, it's an echo of a procession. Only, are they being carried in a celebratory procession? It doesn't sound like it. What does it sound like they're being carried? They are a burden. They have become a burden. Yes. And where are they going in their being carried, in their procession? Into captivity. Right? So what this is a picture of these two gods being taken on these beasts of burden, right? This line, borne by beasts of burden, is NIV. Consigned to the beasts is NASB. It's a hard line to translate. It doesn't quite, they're not quite sure how to line it up. But the picture is, and beasts of burden are having to carry these idols, and they're being carried off into captivity, which is the reversal of what happened to Judah and to like the golden implements of Yahweh's temple and to the people. They were carried into captivity into Babylon. So now it's being carried out, right? So it's a kind of a take on what would happen in a procession. So instead of a procession, it's off into captivity. They couldn't. And why are they getting carried off? What's the problem with Bel and Nebo? What's wrong with them? What can they not do? Anything. Their job. What would their job be?
Protecting people.
Right. They could not rescue. Right? If a God's job is to rescue, they cannot rescue. And so they could not do their job. And so it's like they cannot relieve the burden of their people by rescuing them. And therefore they are themselves a burden being hauled off into captivity. Kind of a little play on words there, right? A little repetition of that word in two different ways. Now, what does God say in contrast in verse 3? He carries his people, right? You have been what? Born by me from birth, from day one. What is the picture of God here? You have been born by me from birth and have been carried from the womb. A mother. Yeah. This is God as the mother God, isn't it? And God says, how long will God be a mother to his people? Even to your old age, even to your graying years, I will bear you, right? This idea of bearing and delivering, I will bear you and I will deliver you. Deliver is like, in Hebrew, like it is in English, where it's to deliver is to rescue, to deliver is to bear a child, is to give birth to a baby. And so it has these both meanings. And so I think this whole sort of analogy of God as mother is based on this idea of deliver. God is the God who delivers us, rescues us, and has borne us from birth, created us, and has carried us even from the womb. Right? And God says a true God should carry you. You should get that support from your God, not have to be carried around, not have to carry around your God, right? These idol statues cannot rescue. They're a burden, but I can rescue you. I'm like the mother who carries you all of your life. Really a very beautiful image to introduce this contrast that then tells, what's happening to Babylon. Now we're going to get into for the, especially in chapter 47, right? It introduces these ideas. Okay, so the comparison of God to idols continues in the next bit. Will someone read verses 5 through 13, please?
To whom will you compare me or count me equal? To whom will you liken me that we may be compared? Some pour out gold from their bags and weigh out silver on the scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god, and they bow down and worship it. They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. From that spot it cannot move. Though one cries out to it, it does not answer. It cannot save him from his troubles. Remember this, fix it in mind, take it to heart, you rebels. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I will make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east I summon a bird of prey, from a far-off land a man to fulfill my purpose. What I have said, that I will bring about. What I have planned, that I will do. Listen to me, you stubborn-hearted, you who are far from righteousness. I am bringing my righteousness near. It is not far away, and my salvation will not be delayed. I will grant salvation to Zion, my splendor to Israel.
Thank you. Okay, great. So what is being said in this section? What stands out to you? What do you notice?
Again, the idols can do nothing for them.
Idols can do nothing for them. They're like, what are they like here?
Just they're man-made by the goldsmith.
Yeah, by the
And
goldsmith.
they're just set in place and they can't move.
Okay, so that idea, like either you have to carry them or you have to nail their feet down so they don't topple over. I'm referring to a previous passage that said the topple over part. But, it's implied here, it's kind of pulling on that previous passage. Like these idols are pathetic. They cannot do anything. Yeah. What else?
Cry out to them and they don't answer.
You get nothing from them. The very center, like the thematic statement of this passage is right in the center. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from distress, right?
And
So
he repeats, I am God, there is none.
right, and you see, so it's kind of the way this is structured. It's like idols won't do it. Remember, recall, remember. See those 3 lines in 8 and 9, and then it's I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is no one like me. So that's the contrast between idols are nothing. Remember, recall, remember, I am God. So you see the structure there. Yeah, and it really draws to that point that they should not be blind and deaf Israel, right? Every time they're called to remember, every time they're called, do you not know, have you not heard? Don't be blind and deaf Israel. Recognize the truth of who God is, right? Who is God referring to in verse 11?
Is that Cyrus?
Yeah, I would say so. I call a bird of prey from the east. So we have that clue of from the east again, yeah. A man of my purpose, God saying, that all along that Cyrus is accomplishing God's purpose from a far country. And then there's the promise. I have spoken. I will bring it to pass. Surely I will do it. We get, last lesson we talked about how there's the assumption that Israel would resist this plan, right? That they wouldn't like the Cyrus part of this plan. They might like the rescue part, but they wouldn't like the Cyrus part. And here it's made a little bit more explicit. Notice in verse 12, listen to me, you stubborn-minded. They're not, the expectation is that they're not accepting. And it also says they are far from what? Righteousness. Okay, what does that mean? They are far from righteousness.
They're not following God.
Not following God in what way? Because I think that I would normally assume that this is in like moral uprightness, like doing right things and not doing wrong things. But the context here is a little different, right? He's not talking about them sinning so much as he's talking about them being far from righteousness, but I will bring my righteousness near. So what is the meaning of righteousness there?
They were far from God, they weren't worshiping him.
Okay,
Right-hearted?
right-hearted. Go ahead,
They were
Chris.
also far from Jerusalem, from the temple, so they couldn't do
They-
their rituals.
Right, they could not physically do the sacrifices that were required at the temple. They were required to call out to God and not to idols. And I think that you're onto something with the way that, like, far from relying on God, believing God's plan. And we remember that every time we see righteousness in these passages, it has been related to the right action of God to accomplish God's purposes. So when God talks about God's righteousness all through here, right, it's repeated over and over again, we see that that means God is going to carry out his right destiny that he has planned for Israel. And so when they are stubborn-minded, when they won't believe the Cyrus plan, right, when they're not on board with the Cyrus plan, they are far from what God has established. This is my right action to accomplish my right purpose, right? So this is a call to join God in God's plans rather than having their own, which, that we could relate to that, I think. Joining God in what God has planned, even if I really had a vision of this is how it should go, and this would be next, and this would be how this would unfold, and that would go and then everything unfolds totally differently and it doesn't seem good. But when God is acting, we bring ourselves back to join in God's righteousness, in God's right plan.
You said it before, I just told them, you're blind and you're deaf, you see and you hear, but you don't really see it.
You don't.
You're not paying attention.
Yeah, you don't take it to heart even. Yeah, that idea that they were blind and deaf because they saw, but they didn't take it. Yeah, and that's a challenge. That's our challenge, right? We constantly want to be bringing ourselves to God to say, let me be in your right plan. Let me really see. Let me really hear. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yes.
there's also point back to the victory speeches that Cyrus would have saying, I walked in and they welcomed me with open arms. Because if the people of God listened to this, then they would be welcoming Cyrus.
Maybe. I'm not sure they were that influential in Babylon, the city, but I think that's an interesting point. Yeah, that's something to think about, definitely.
Of course, there is a gift in there.
Yeah. Well, and we saw him described as kind of chewing up the country, and so this has been a violent process. It hasn't been pretty, and so God doesn't expect you to like things that are painful. You may have to trust God through them, but you can say, God, this is painful. The Psalms are full of that, right? Okay, so we have seen this introductory image of the gods of Babylon being carried into captivity and heard God reiterate, like, look, I have a plan, get on board, right? Come to righteousness. Righteousness is here in my plan. Come near to it, right? And so now we're ready for the meat of the fate of Babylon. Let's read just verses 1-3 to start. 47, yeah.
Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man.
Okay. Woo. Yes, I saw a woo. Okay. So that's why we started with just 3 verses, so we can kind of get oriented here. Who are we talking to? Who's being addressed here? Babylon, right? And how is Babylon personified?
As the virgin daughter of
The virgin daughter
Who has fallen.
who has
Now,
fallen.
a slave or-
Okay. So fallen from what? The throne, exactly. So what we're talking about is kind of a princess image, right? Princess Babylon, it might be the way that or young, maiden Babylon, however you would call it. So this daughter, this princess is a metaphor for the kingdom. Do you remember this has been weeks ago. We talked about how Lamentations has a mourning for Jerusalem, and that Lamentations 1 and 2 personify Jerusalem as a woman. So listen to Lamentations 1 verses 1 and 2. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. She has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become like a forced laborer. She weeps bitterly in the night, and the tears are on her cheeks. She has no one to comfort her among all her lovers. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. So you notice that Jerusalem is personified as what? A woman, even a princess. Yeah. A queen, maybe, because she's become a widow, a princess, maybe an unfaithful, because it talks about all of her lovers. But that same idea of a woman who has become a forced laborer that's Jerusalem when they first went into captivity. So what we're getting here in chapter 47 is that same image. Then, the reversal is that now it is applied to Babylon, right?
downfall in both places.
It's a downfall, right? Before, Babylon did this to Jerusalem. Now the same thing is happening to Babylon. So that's kind of how we're oriented, right? Why sit in the dust? Verse 1. What does that mean? Job sat in the dust. Why? Mourning, right? This is an activity of mourning, a practice, and so it indicates what's happening to Princess Babylon. They're being overtaken, the city. Yeah. What about how's it said about this woman?
Shouldn't have throne anymore.
No throne. Verse 2. What else?
No more tender or delicate.
No more tender or delicate, right? So there are several little lines in here about uncovering the leg or nakedness being exposed. And so we wonder, is this an implication of like sexual abuse or rape, which did happen in war and still does happen in war? I'll just share with you what my commentary thought about that. They said the words are not the ones commonly used in this connection to sexual abuse or rape. In this context, they more likely suggest the undignified exposure of someone who simply has to get down to work. She will have to, for instance, trudge across the Babylonian countryside with its irrigation ditches and so on. So it is the idea of just becoming a commoner, becoming like the loss of station.
Let's just take the millstone and grind the meal.
Yes.
So you gotta go to work.
Yes. So you got to go to work, and hard work and undignified work is kind of what's being implied there. Questions or comments on that section? Okay, I'm going to read 5 through 15 here. It's a little bit long, but if you'll Stick with me. Sit silently and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. We remember Chaldeans as a synonym for Babylonians. For you will no longer be called the queen of kingdoms. I was angry with my people. I profaned my heritage and gave them into your hand. You did not show mercy to them. On the aged, you made your yoke very heavy. Yet you said, I will be a queen forever. These things you did not consider, nor remember the outcome of them. Now hear this, you sensual one, who dwells securely and says in your heart, I am, and there is no one beside me. I will not sit as a widow, nor no loss of children. But these two things will come on you suddenly in one day, loss of children and widowhood. They will come on you in full measure, in spite of your sorceries, in spite of the great power of your spells. You felt secure in your wickedness and said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge, they have deluded you. For you said in your heart, I am, and there is no one beside me. But evil will come on you, which you will not know how to charm away, and disaster will fall on you for which you cannot atone, and destruction about which you do not know will come on you suddenly. Stand fast now in your spells, in your many sorceries, and with which you have labored from your youth. Perhaps you will be able to profit. Perhaps you may cause trembling. You are wearied with your many counsels. Let now the astrologers, those who prophesy by the stars, those who predict by the new moons, stand up and save you from what will come upon you. Behold, they have become like stubble. Fire burns them. They cannot deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There will be no coal to warm by, not a fire to sit before. So have those become to you with whom you labored, whom you trafficked with you from your youth. Each has wandered in his own way, and there is none to save you. Okay, that's quite a ending, right, for Babylon, isn't it? So what reason does God give that God gave Israel over to Babylon in the first place?
He's angry with them.
Yeah, verse 6, I was angry with my people, right? The earlier part of Isaiah dealt extensively with why God was angry with them. And we saw that there was practices that preyed on the poor, business practices, unfair business practices, and they failed to protect the widows and the orphans. And those are called out strongly. What's being focused on here? What did they fail to do?
They're boasting in what they can do.
Okay, right. All right. So Israel has I struggled with idolatry. Babylon is boasting, right? It's very clear how boastful they are. Where do you get that? Which lines read that way to you?
You've trusted in your wickedness.
Yeah.
Your wisdom and knowledge has perverted you. And they say, I am and none else beside me.
Okay, I am and none else beside me. Whose line should that be? God's, right? We recognize that. Like, whoa, you said it, and you notice it puts it in here twice. So it's very strong. What does it mean that they say, I am and there's none beside me? What are they thinking about themselves?
They can do anything they need to do without God.
Right.
They can do it.
They can do it. Very self-directed, right? It's a sense of like, they are gods unto themselves in some way, right? That is the idea. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, what else? What other problems do we have with Babylon and their behavior? What did Babylon do wrong? That's a big one. What else?
But are we even expecting Babylon to be good? Because, I mean, we expect God sent them up there to be punished, so
why would we expect Babylon?
Them?
Okay. With them doing what? What did they do? And I want to talk about that. I think that's a really good point. Have mercy. Okay. So there is this idea that they did not show mercy. And in general, Babylon was cruel. They were known to be cruel, as the big nations, conquering nations were, right? I mean, the only one crueler was Assyria, the last conquering nation, right? And they put a heavy yoke on the aged, as you mentioned. What do you think that means? What does a heavy yoke on the aged mean?
Made them work past their ability to
Their
work.
prime.
Yeah, I think forced labor, inhumane conditions is how we would put that in modern terms, right? So, okay, these were normal behaviors for conquerors in that day. So, and God sent them to conquer. So, does that make it okay for them? Apparently not. Yeah.
I mean, how would they know that they weren't supposed to be that bad to them?
Yeah. I think so. Just the idea is that the idea appears to be that they should have known not to be cruel. That maybe people are created to know that cruelty is wrong, and that all people should know that. Seems to be implied here, Chris.
I giggled a moment ago. My thought was, well, their gods sure are telling them how to behave.
Right. Their gods are not doing a good job because all they do is sit around with their feet down to the floor. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, the idea of God's justice coming around so that even God's instrument is subject to God's standard of justice shows up across scripture. And that's what we're seeing here, is that they may not have had their gods telling them what to do, but that cruelty and lack of mercy, the kind of abuse that they were perpetuating, there's always justice for it. And this is part of what God says, is that God will not ignore their cruelty, even though they were functioning in a role in God's plan. And I think sometimes that is actually comforting. In some ways, we see, like, is that really fair to them? And, of course, that's kind of a modern way to think, right? Or are people in scriptural times saying, is that fair? Probably not. Right, we think that way, and I do feel that. I was like, well, gosh, did they know any better? But
It was expected, because that's the way it was.
cruelty just doesn't have an excuse, is what is being conveyed here. And so when we look around and we see the rise and fall of powers, of powerful personalities, of nations who behave, we go like, well, I don't know what God's righteousness is doing here, but I do know that God does not let cruelty go forever. God's justice comes around. And so that can help us. To me, I don't know, do you all find that comforting at all? When the nations are terrible, which they sometimes are, and sometimes it's our nation that's terrible, and then it's not so comforting. We know God just doesn't let that go.
You look at Ukraine, the Ukrainians right now.
Okay.
Palestine, Gaza, and all that. When is that going to end?
All these wars, all the cruelty. Yeah, God does not let cruelty go unpunished, not forever. Yeah.
I'm sure to those people it seems like forever.
Oh yes, I think so. Yeah, and it's hard, and we don't know. And this is part of the lesson of the righteousness. This word, the righteousness of God, is that God does have a right plan, and when we're in it, it looks a mess to us. And that can happen on those big scales. It can happen on the small scales of our lives, and the things that go wrong, and the things that are terrible. God's righteousness will come through. Couple of quick notes here. We went out of order, so I'm having to kind of scour and see what more we might want to talk about. This sensual one, or NIV says wanton creature, that is in verse 8, does not necessarily mean like a it just would suggest the enjoyment of good food and the pleasures of life available. It doesn't necessarily mean excess. It doesn't necessarily mean promiscuity. It's just that Princess Babylon had been in a position to live well, and she won't be next, right?
What Bible version were you reading from?
I'm reading from NASB, the New American Standard Bible. And I read from, so I have my NIV and my NASB, and I work from both of them. The NIV is often more understandable. It sometimes takes things and smooths them out. And so you kind of get the idea, like it'll take an idiom and just, we talked about one last week. It was ungird the loins, loose the loins. And it just said strip off the armor. And so we talked about how you get there. It's like to gird up the loins is to pick up the robe and put on the armor. And so to loose the loins is to do the opposite, to take off the armor. And so NIV just says stripped of armor. So it's easier to understand, but I also really like how literal the NASB is. And so that's why I read from both. And I will often take the NASB because it's pretty good about using the same word in English every time the same word in Hebrew or Greek is used. You know what I mean? And sometimes the NIV will use 3 different words to catch what they think the nuance of that verse is, but you can't tell that it's the same word in Hebrew. And I want to know that. So that's why I use both. If you RSV is a good substitute for the NASB if you want something else that does that.
It looks like in verse 8, they're just thinking nothing bad is going to happen to them.
Yes. Yeah. And that idea of being self-directed,
Right.
and overconfident is a familiar one. We want to be self-directed. We're trying to do a good job of doing our work and getting it done. But the humility, the true humility is recognizing the reality that I'm not in control and that God is. So what's one more problem with Babylon? One last problem, mentioned several times. Try verse 9.
Sorcery.
The sorceries. Ah, yes, their spells. Their wisdom and knowledge seems to come from their religious practice of reading the signs, right? And primarily they would read signs in the sky. They would also read signs in entrails. You may have seen that in depictions of Greek life later. And there are ways, like in verse 12, we can see that their sorceries are a path to profit, right? Perhaps you will be able to profit. A path to intimidation. Perhaps you will be able to cause trembling. That power that comes from saying this is what will happen or I can make happen, right? Path to profit, power, and sort of advisor status, right? You're wearied with your many counsels, right? They're the knowledgeable ones. They're the ones that are sought out for wisdom, right? And this is what they would use their astrology for. They prophesize by the stars, by predictions and new moons. This is an elaborate feature of Babylonian life. That's something that they would do. And in fact, they had extensive libraries with all these precedents and events of astrological significance that they would then go to it's almost like our legal system where you go to the precedent and then use it to interpret but they would do this with the position of the stars and the planets. So they would have all these precedents that they would use and consult to do, predict or influence coming events. Now, how do you think this might have affected the Jews who were there in Babylon? Maybe do it too, right? It's the path to profit and power and wisdom, right? they would be in danger of being won over to these practices. Whereas the Torah forbids all kinds of sorcery and divination. And so this would be wrong, but maybe they would, there would be a sense of them being drawn into it, right? And what does God say will come of the astrologers, verse 14?
They're gonna be burned up,
Burned up like,
stubble.
yeah, stubble. Like this is the same like grass being burned up image that we talked about in our very first week. It shows up over and over. They'll just be like the chaff, like the clippings, the grass clippings that just go get burned and blown away, right? Because they are unable to deliver themselves, the power of their practice will be shown to be false.
In 13 it says, if they can do all this, let them stand up and do it.
See, well, let's see.
Let's see if they can do it.
Right, this is an idea that keeps getting repeated, doesn't it? That if the idols, if the sorceries, if the practices of the nations can stand up against God, let's see it. And then we see that they can't. And so the final verdict is there is no one to save you. So what have we learned about Babylon and Babylon's fate?
They should listen to God.
Okay.
Come up with something.
Yeah. And I think, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there were some ways that God would intervene and give them a clue that they should listen to God. When we read Daniel, we certainly see God sending messages that you should listen to God, right? Even though it was going to this foreign nation of Babylon. And that is really pronounced in the story of Daniel and all of those individual pieces with Daniel and the friends, right? So yes, they were supposed to be God's instrument, but then they were cruel and abusive, and God will not let that go. And we see that part of God's plan is to make sure justice is done. Yeah, what else?
Their power of reason just was not there, because all of these signs and everything and God talking to them, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I think they thought, well, and we do this, right? They were winning.
Yeah.
What happens when you're winning?
You keep going.
Right? Everything looks like it's going your way. It must be working. And they thought because they were winning that they were self-directed, that they were making it happen, that they were the ones in charge. But because they were not trusting God, obeying God, being acting right in, I guess, human, decent ways, it's all blown away like burnt grass. Yeah. This idea is that the reversal is coming, where what they have perpetrated will then come back on them. And these things have happened to Israel already. But Israel, if they will turn to God, will have God to save them. And what the question that's left hanging here is, if you will not turn to God, then you won't have anyone to save you. Questions or comments on these passages, on the fate of Babylon?
I don't know if you can say feel sorry for Babylon. But from their point of view, they were able to conquer this people because their God wasn't taking care of them. So we were able to conquer you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I know they had Daniel was able to show them, that their God is powerful, but, I keep thinking in their mind how they could really see that this God who gave up Israel is now saying, okay, I don't like what you're doing, I'm taking them back.
Yeah.
It just is kind of funny to me. Happy, glad that it happened.
Glad for Israel, sad for Babylon. Yeah. So I think, your sense of empathy is a right sense, right? Like we, as Babylon, should have had some empathy as they were doing theirs. So we should have empathy for Babylon, because even though we see their mistakes, we know, my life has some mistakes in it too, right? Like we all have our struggles. We all think of ourselves as self-directed, we'll be going through something and then we'll realize, oh, actually I have no control over that. So all of my efforts towards that make no difference because that's not in my control. I'm not in charge of that. And so, yeah, I don't think your empathy is misplaced because they're an enemy. I think it's right because as we will continue to see as we go forward, God wants all the people to turn to God. And even now, we have Jesus to allow us to reach out to all the people to turn to God. And so it's free. Jesus and the love of Jesus and the salvation of Jesus are now free for the taking. And so anyone is free to believe. And it's such good news.
Yeah.
What good news, right? Well, we've seen in these passages, God is passionate to call out the worthlessness of idols once again, right? And this time it's Bel and Nebo, and they're being carried off into captivity. But it continues to follow this pattern of don't trust in these things with no power, because I'm standing at the door ready to save, and I have the power to save you. And that is God's message here again. God puts forward the good alternative to every powerless thing, which is Yahweh, God himself, right? And God is willing to carry us our whole lives and never let us go. Like a mother who's willing to carry us in the womb, to bear us into the world, who carries us all the way into salvation. And that image of love is so strong here. And it's given to us as this promise. The God who would be our Savior will also, be that loving, nurturing, carrying God. Well, thank you for a great discussion today. We will be off next week. Next week is spring break, so no lesson next week. And then the following week will be in lesson 8, Salvation to the End of the Earth, over Isaiah 48 and 49. I'm going to stop this. Oh, here.